My dear friends, in the liturgy there is an echo of the statio of this day in early times, where the Supreme Pontiff, already from the time of Gregory the Great, would have been in one of the 7 major churches of Rome, still called to this day Holy Cross in Jerusalem, Santa Croce in Jerusalem, because of the amount of earth that was brought after the cessation of persecution, when there was excavation of the site there, of the sepulchre, the Calvary area, by Helena, St. Helena, the mother of Constantine, and big chunks were brought back. And there stands now the Church of the Holy Cross with major relics inside. But closer to us we have also a bit of the Holy Land. And on this day we think of it. It was on this night, between the 9th and the 10th of December, that the second part of the miracle of the rescuing of the Holy House took place. You will know the story, but I'll refresh your memories. It was too precious to be lost, and heaven intervened. You will remember that at that time, lots of things were going on in the Holy Land, including, for instance, the expulsion of the Carmelites. They had to go from Mount Carmel, and they came to the west and took on the form of mendicant friars, as we have them to this day. But they look precisely to a virgin. They look to this mysterious woman that they were given to understand way back in pre-Christian times would be there. Carmel is all Mary's. She came with them. But she came, in this case, in a very dramatic way. The Islamic bloc was keen on destroying certain things, it would seem, but heaven would not allow it. It led, of course, to the Crusades eventually, but that's another story. You can just about see what's going on here. Our Lady would not allow the house where she had been praying for so long, where the Archangel Gabriel had come, and where the Son of God was warmly welcomed to this planet and looked after, with St. Joseph, in a house full of angels and protected by the same. And there is a promise that this house will never be destroyed. You may smile with a smile of reason to say, come off it. But I tell you, it's true. And actually science will prove it. You have only to compare the place where it's come from with what's there. There are no foundations, the foundations are where it's come from, and it's exactly the continuation of what is there. And the demon has been very loud between these holy walls. He couldn't bear it, and he was obliged to say certain things, even that the walls of this house are more dense with grace than even those of the Vatican, St. Peter's itself. And he said, under duress, my brother Gabriel was here. He cannot bear it. And so it is that we have this not far away from us here in Europe, near Ancona, having spent the first 3 years in the present Croatia. But it wasn't being given sufficient reverence, and heaven wanted more. So it was brought closer to the heart of Europe, where it's the most popular place of pilgrimage throughout Italy, at least to Our Blessed Lady. Dense with prayer. Here we are. And I would like to transport you there for a few seconds to help you to relive that scene where it actually says on top, hic, here, verbum caro factum est, which we'll hear again at the end of Mass, bending the knee. What happened? Can you imagine this damsel who had given her virginity and therefore had no hope of becoming a mother, being in prayer and seeing this presence coming out of nowhere? In humble form, bending the knee in heavenly courtesy. sometimes actually presented in iconography in dalmatic. That's what the deacon wears. Full of grace. She was prepared by the Immaculate Conception. But she had to give consent. And we have in that beautiful sermon of St. Bernard, the whole cosmos waiting for that word. All the centuries, all the prophets, all mankind waiting in suspense for one word from the supreme representative of the human race at that point. The glorious Virgin Mary had to say fiat. And when it was pronounced, at that instant, there was this silent, cosmic explosion of grace. And actually you can see it. This has come from Medjugorje, I believe. And you can see just about there, the light in the womb. This is the center of the universe. The same light that we have at the altar at the moment of the consecration. The same light that you bear in your heart when you receive the Lord of Hosts. Which brings me to where I want to land for a second. Do you realize what you're doing when you come to the altar? Do you realize what you're doing when you come into the presence of God at the Holy Sacrifice? We can't see, and therefore we tend to forget. But some have seen. There was, in recent times, a vision given to a holy monk of the Eastern Orthodox Church. He was allowed to see in church what was going on. And because he was a priest, he was able to transmit it to the faithful, which I do now in his name to you also here in the West, where we've become somewhat more casual perhaps than they have. The quickie, whereas they go on for 3 hours. Now, he said to them like this, if you could only see, there are myriads of angels around. And he was allowed to see in vision one thing which perhaps is very much for you, for me here in the West. If it was already true of the East, it's this. He could see this going on. These angels in the holy sacrifice were singing without ceasing to the Majesty on high, which they of course can see. Without ceasing, Hagios, Hagios, Hagios. But then he was allowed to see this shocking scene. Some people were starting to talk, were getting bored and talking to each other. And suddenly, this chant was interrupted. And the angels looked down on those who were talking to each other and not to the Lord of Hosts. And they could not carry on. And they were looking with deep sadness at the malice in these souls that forgot what they were doing and where they were doing it and in whose company they were doing it. Do you see what that means here in the West, where it's far worse? The average celebration in Ireland is very short, and people hardly in church are talking to each other about the weather and the football. Even in church, they start finding some excellent reason, provoked no doubt from the pulpit, to start giggling and laughing. Even when Holy Communion is taking place, they are in a hurried mode. It must be over and done with as quickly as possible, with extraordinary ministers, unconsecrated hands. It doesn't matter, as long as it's over and done with, to get to the church notices. The important And so it is that when it comes to Christmas itself, what will it be? I'll tell you what it'll be. It'll be in 2023, no room in the inn. It'll be a great feast. Where will be Jesus? Out in the cold, badly used in church, all going towards the crescendo, which is Sandy. 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 My friends, don't celebrate the feast. Have a little time, at least, for Jesus. Keep Christmas simple, but enjoy your King. Remember, if it weren't for him coming, we'd be in a big mess. We'd be the prey of the one that can't bear the holy house. I just finished with one other point on this 10th of December. It was in 1610 in London that St. John Roberts was celebrating the sacred mysteries in secret, and he was at the last Gospel pronouncing the words et verbum caro factum est, when suddenly he heard, "Open up! Open up in the name of the King!" And the door came down. And a few days later, he was hanging on Tyburn Tree, still alive, brought down, ripped open, and his innards were pulled out and burned. And last of all came the heart. "Behold, the heart of a traitor!" To which everyone had to reply, "God live the King!" But no one replied, for this was a good man who helped the poor in the plague in London. But he was a traitor, apparently. He didn't wish to please the authorities. He pleased his King and died for the real presence which we take for granted and belittle supremely.